Welcome to Monday Night Live, the YouTube show all about Notre Dame football from the staff at Inside ND Sports and the Rivals Network that's inching its way toward viral status. Thanks to you all. I'm Eric Hansen. He's Tyler James. We are two of the seemingly few human beings on the planet today who are not in the transfer portal because, quite frankly, we did that last December. Our recruiting writer, Kyle Kelly, is getting ahead of the curve on the latest recruiting and portal developments. Meanwhile, Tyler and I tonight share our thoughts on Notre Dame's Gator Bowl matchup with South Carolina, the other USC, and we'll take your questions. That segment is coming soon, so start filling up the question portal.
Yeah, and also make sure you hit the thumbs up to like this video and also subscribe to our channel if you aren't already. That helps us get in front of more viewers, and we've seen our audience continue to grow, and that's something that we are very encouraged by. So we appreciate the support there, and the more you can do to help us share this YouTube channel along really helps us, and it goes a long way. So before we get to your questions, we're going to have Eric share with us his 5 headlines for this Monday evening as Notre Dame has learned its bowl opponent and is pushing forward into the transfer portal season and towards the early signing period.
Okay. Well, we're going to start with Let's Go Bowling. And the Gator Bowl selected Notre Dame, who's number 21 in the country in the college football playoff rankings, to play number 19 South Carolina. We'll get to some of the specifics of the matchup later in the show. But first of all, Tyler, do we like the opponent?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think in some ways they're kind of similar seasons where they had some losses that started to add up, and then South Carolina has certainly ended it on a higher note than Notre Dame did, with Notre Dame losing to USC, whereas South Carolina won its last 2 games against Tennessee and its rival Clemson. So I think it's a good matchup. It's not like an impossible game for Notre Dame. It's an SEC opponent, so me personally, I don't know that I'd probably prefer to go to San Diego rather than Jacksonville.
Yeah.
But in terms of like the game that we'll get to see on the field, I think it's a pretty intriguing one. How about you?
Yeah, I like it. I like the fact that South Carolina has a couple top 10 wins. Both Notre Dame and South Carolina, I believe, have more top 10 wins this year than Alabama does. And actually Ohio State, if you want to get technical about it. Oh, no. Yeah, I think Penn State's in the top 10, so we won't go there. And it's also a matchup where and we'll get into this a little bit later, where Notre Dame matches up well with the team, where I think it's going to be a competitive game because it's kind of strength against strength, weakness against weakness in certain aspects. But it's definitely a game that Notre Dame can win. We talked about the other kind of alternatives. Notre Dame was in the mix, and apparently a lot deeper in the mix than we thought, for the Holiday Bowl, which would have put them against Oregon. I think that would have been a great matchup. And then the other alternative would have been the Cheez-It Bowl in Orlando against Oklahoma, a 6-6 Oklahoma team. I mean, Oklahoma's a name brand,
right?
But I think that would have been a kind of a crummy game for the Irish to draw. I know a lot of people wanted it to be LSU. There was just too many things the football gods had to do to get LSU to drop all the way down into the Gator Bowl, into that area. They were a couple of rungs ahead of this pick for the SEC. So all in all, I like it a lot. Now the other thing that a lot of people ask me is, is all this bowl stuff really worth it, given that a lot of players are opting out now? Now, not necessarily in this bowl. We don't know the extent of players that won't be available yet. But I think overall it is worth the bowl experience. I think, especially with Notre Dame's situation, with its quarterbacks, with some of its developmental players, that we're not going to probably find out more about how good this Notre Dame team really was in 2022, but I think we're going to find out some things that'll be helpful for 2023.
Yeah, I wouldn't like the result of this game isn't going to be defining for the past season or defining of the off season. I just think it's sort of just another opportunity for improvement and for experience for Notre Dame's coaching staff, for Notre Dame's players. So I don't know that what we see on the field on December 30th in Jacksonville is going to like dictate what we think about Notre Dame moving forward. I think it certainly would be nice to see Tyler Buckner out there and having some success, because his success was fairly limited in the first 2 games of the season before he got injured. And then we haven't seen much of Steve Angeli. How much of him will we see in this game? I think that's to be determined. Marcus Freeman was not showing his hand at all. He named all 3 quarterbacks on the roster in Steve Angeli, Tyler Buckner, and Ron Paulus III as guys that are available and could play in the game. So we will see what that sort of looks like. And that sort of fell in line with sort of the overall thing. Like, we didn't get a lot of answers on Sunday evening when we spoke to both Marcus Freeman or Shane Beamer. They weren't giving us lists of guys who are sitting out. They both expressed that they had wanted their players to sort of take the week, this past week, to sort of decompress, think through their options, and then sort of come into this week having a plan of what they want to do, whether it's hit the transfer portal, whether it's declare for the NFL draft, sit out the bowl game, and make sure they have a plan going forward. I thought it was interesting. South Carolina has their exams this week, which I think is a little bit of an advantage to sort of get those out of the way for South Carolina, but I don't know that it's necessarily going to make a big difference. But I thought that was interesting just to know what the academic calendars were, because we wouldn't have any idea otherwise. So what are your thoughts on sort of this uncertainty of who will or won't be available in the game on December 30th?
Well, I think it's coming into a little bit of focus as we see the transfer portal, which is about the next thing that we're going to be talking about, heating up. As far as opt-outs, I mean, when you really think about it, Notre Dame has 2 pretty high draft choices in Michael Mayer and Isaiah Foskey. And, again, I can live without them being in the game. It would be great for them to play. I think there are different people, like maybe the 2 offensive guards, Lugg and Patterson, that would be more difficult to do without, or somebody like Tariq Bracy. And then on South Carolina's side, I know that Spencer Rattler is planning on playing. That's their quarterback. I think the one guy that we probably look for maybe not to be available for them is Cam Smith, their defensive back, who's one of the top DBs in the draft prospect, probably number 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. And then they're going to have some portal people too. So, and guys in the portal they're not necessarily disqualified for playing, but it seems like it's going to work out that way. Again, before this year, we didn't have these designated windows for the portal.
Right.
So a lot of guys are willing to wait until after their bowl games to do that, especially if they had a chance to play. That wasn't the case this year.
Yeah, I'm going to sidetrack us real quick and share with you the Heisman Trophy finalists that were announced recently. I don't know if you've seen this.
I have not.
But it is 4 quarterbacks. Do you want to take a guess which 4 they are?
Okay, I'll go with Caleb Williams.
Yes.
CJ Stroud.
Yes.
Max Dugan.
Yes.
And the 4th one, boy, I'm blanking on that. Drew Pine. Just kidding.
Stetson Bennett, Georgia's own Drew Pine.
Okay.
Which that was probably the one that I wouldn't have necessarily thought for sure would have made it, but it's not surprising to see someone from Georgia make the list just because of the run of success that program has had. So figured I'd share that since we are live and people might not have heard that yet. But
did you get your vote in by 5?
I did get my vote in. I made sure to do that. Carter Carls texted me in a panic, not about his Heisman vote, but about another vote, asking if he had missed the deadline. Carter Carls, our former coworker at the South Bend Tribune, and so I was giving him a hard time about that. And then he got jealous when I said I had to submit my Heisman vote. So it's definitely a blessing. I mean, it's a privilege to do it. It is a responsibility I take seriously. And the Heisman Trophy takes it pretty serious too. Like the process of submitting the votes isn't necessarily easy. You got to make sure you get everything verified and doing all that. But I'm glad to be able to take part in that.
And I would say I've been voting, I think, since '84 on the Heisman, and this is probably the latest I ever got my vote in. It was probably 2 this afternoon, and the deadline was 5. I was planning to do it yesterday, but and really 1 and 2, I was pretty sure who I was going to vote for. It was really that number 3, and sometimes I've used number 3 for an unconventional candidate. Um, I voted for Quentin Nelson third a few years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I really believe he belonged on the ballot. I thought he was one of the best 3 players in the country that year. So I wanted to really research and make sure that I wasn't kind of giving that third place vote away. How about you? How hard was it to vote for that?
Yeah, the third place one was the one that I thought a little bit about as well. And we're not trying to be coy. We are being coy intentionally because they
Right.
ask us not to reveal who we vote for. So that's why we're not telling you who we put on our ballots. But you do vote for a first place, a second place, and a third place. And I agree with you. Like trying to get someone in that third place spot that you think deserves it and making sure that it's the right person. So I didn't spend a ton of time sweating over it. I think there were a lot of people that were deserving.
Well, I didn't have it either because I had to pick you up and take you to the bank.
And it was a lot of quarterbacks. Like I think it was hard. I like to try to get non-quarterbacks on there, but there was just a lot of obvious quarterback options that could be included there. That's obviously shown by the 4 finalists all being quarterbacks.
Right. Are we being are we disclosing too much if we say what position our third place guy was?
No, I think that's fine. I mean, if you say what the position was, I think that's fair.
Okay, mine was a tight end.
Unless you said like it was a long snapper, and like maybe that would be a narrow list. Like who could possibly be at the long snapper on there? So, but yeah, that's interesting. I will see who ends up winning it. We obviously know the tight end you put as third. It's not going to end up winning the Heisman Trophy, but I'm not even sure when the date of the Heisman Trophy ceremony is, but it'll be coming up here.
It's maybe next Saturday, isn't it? The date of the Army-Navy game, I'm pretty sure, but
fairly soon.
You can look that up while I'm blathering if you want.
All right, let's go ahead and get to your second headline now.
Okay.
How's that sound?
My second headline is the portal tsunami is here. So the 45-day window started today, and it'll extend to January 18th. And then the second window will be May 1st through the 15th. If you're a grad transfer, you're immune from that. You can jump into the portal anytime that you want. If you're a player whose coach gets fired, you also have some leeway with the portal windows. But otherwise, you have to enter the portal during one of these 2 periods. Last year, through the whole cycle from the time that the beginning of the portal period to the end, it was almost 2,000 scholarship players that jumped into the portal last year. And it felt like that just today. I know we didn't get there, but I think we're over 1,000 today, or we will be by the end of the day. And so let's talk about Notre Dame's departees and also the offered prospects incoming in this segment. So with the guys that are leaving, we already knew about Joe Wilkins, who was a grad transfer, Jacob Lacey, grad transfer, and Drew Pine, who announced before he actually jumped in today, the quarterback. And then today's additions were Jaden Bellamy, a freshman cornerback from New Jersey, Steve Angeli's high school teammate, and then Asito Dinmo Aquanu. Did I say that right?
I'm not. To be frank, I'm not. I'm not certain. I hadn't got the pronunciation guide on the expanded first name for Aquanu, but
He asked to be called that, so not specifically on this show, but by everybody.
right. That's what his preferred first name is. I imagine that's probably what his given first name was, and he just had went by Osita for a long time. And he's obviously the twin brother of former NC State offensive lineman and first round draft pick Ekem Aquanu, who's been pretty good. Icky, I think, is what his nickname is.
Yeah,
And
they're twins.
Twins, different size, but
Yeah.
they're both pretty imposing fellas, I would say. So I'd be interested to see Aquanu, the Notre Dame version. He had a Achilles injury last season, so that certainly impacted his career trajectory. And we'll see if he can sort of land somewhere and get some playing time, because that didn't necessarily happen a lot during his Notre Dame career.
Yeah, he would have been the guy that I thought would have been the first one in the portal. Bellany actually, of those two, was the first of those two to go in, but he was there. So, are you surprised that we didn't get more portal action outgoing for Notre Dame today?
Yeah, I suppose. I think there will be more coming. I mean, I wasn't sure of the timing exactly of when guys would go in there. So this certainly isn't okay. Notre Dame knows what it has coming back, and the rest of the guys that aren't in there yet are staying. So I thought it would be more sort of, all right, let's just get in there and get things rolling. But you never really know what the holdup is. Sometimes it could be as simple as paperwork not having gone through yet to be able to finally be in the transfer portal. So we'll see some more movement and see what's left of Notre Dame's roster after that. I don't think it's going to be a mass exodus and certainly change the way Notre Dame's roster looks, but the Irish have been very aggressive in the 2023 recruiting class, and that's in part because it felt like it would be losing some guys from the roster. And I think they're even looking to potentially even expand beyond where they're at right now. And I think they're at 26 commitments at this point. It's hard to keep track. The number keeps getting so high. And I think they could be looking into getting some more there. So, yeah, I mean, specifically to Jaden Bellamy, was that a decision? And I know this is a question that Ron Robert had asked in the comments here. Were you surprised to see that he made the decision to enter the transfer portal?
I am, and I wonder if there's something more, to it at this point. We haven't had a chance to talk to Jaden, but just if you're just basing it on playing time, he was injured part of the year. He had a head injury late in the season, and I know that the coaches back in August had high hopes for him, not necessarily for playing this year, but for playing down the road. They were happy with all three of those freshman cornerbacks. So yeah, that one. So again, you kind of wonder if there was something else going on that sparked that decision, because it just didn't seem like he gave it enough of a chance. Now, if you thought about other cornerbacks on the roster, possibly because you have two freshmen that are playing a lot,
right?
And then there are two really good freshmen in Micah Bell and Christian Gray coming in, and Kim Hart's coming back.
Right.
So you might say, well, where is my playing time? There's not a lot of, unless can turn myself into a nickel, there's not a lot of encouraging signs that I could play next year. So that would, that's a position that I wouldn't be surprised if there's some attrition eventually. Maybe, again, some of these guys want to go to Florida for post-Christmas before they think about that. And some may want to play through the spring and have confidence that they can climb the depth chart then.
Yeah, and we appreciate Ron for sending in that question, and continue to send in your questions. We'll get to some more later, and as we sort of hit some of the headlines that we've been that Eric sort of laid out for us for today. So Eric, let's get to I guess before we move on from this one, we didn't talk much about the transfers that Notre Dame is sort of targeting right now. To this point, Notre Dame has offered two transfer portal players, Braden Fisk a Western Michigan defensive lineman who actually went to high school in Michigan City, Indiana, not far from South Bend. And then Dante Cephas, a wide receiver from Kent State, who would be a grad. Both of these guys would be grad transfers. So the decision and pushing forward with an offer is a bit easier in the cases when you're looking at graduate transfer guys. So I think that's led to the sort of the quick trigger. I don't know that usually Notre Dame has a good sense of, and that's part of this transfer portal world now, that you need to have a sense of not just who you like once they get in the portal, but who to anticipate maybe getting into the portal and be prepared for those things. And so Dante Cephas jumped in there and received an offer. Braden Fisk actually was on campus this past weekend for a visit. That's how quickly things started to move there. But obviously that's pretty easy travel for him with going to college in Kalamazoo and growing up in Michigan City. So
if you have a paid visit going from Michigan City, do you like get free stuff at the gas station at the corner of I-94 and US 35? That used to be Shirley's Amico when I lived over there. So anyways, that was a rhetorical question. I suppose maybe it'll come up in the questions. You guys are doing a great job of filling up the question portal. Keep doing it. We're going to move on to the next headline, which is the quarterback tsunami is here. So since we last chatted with you all, Drew Pine has decided to leave Notre Dame. And we know now that Tyler Buckner has been cleared for practices. Notre Dame's had a couple of practices already. He's participated in those. I would assume as if he's 100% healthy, he's going to be the starter, even though Marcus was kind of weird, as you mentioned on the Zoom last night, and said, it could be even Ron Paulus III. I would really be interested in seeing the scenario that would propel that to happen, but I suppose it could. And then Steve Angeli, I think whether he starts or not, that he would get some playing time. But then the flip side of that is, a lot of you were asking last week and people in my live chat and so forth, how about the quarterbacks in the portal? And at that time, I wasn't really thrilled with the selection. I figured there would be better ones coming, and man, are there some good ones. And so I'll kind of turn it to you, Tyler, first. We'll double back to Drew Pine, but of the players, the quarterbacks that you've seen in the portal that are realistic for Notre Dame to get, who do you like among them?
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that your like thoughts of the possibilities improved based on who has entered the portal. I don't know that it's not that they're bad ones, but I think they all have like pretty obvious like question marks about like what their future is. And so I don't know that I'm necessarily in love with anyone. I know Roger Lancey asked, any chance that Notre Dame looks at the Clemson quarterback in the portal? And yes, DJ Uiagalelei has entered the portal. He's currently the number one quarterback in the Rivals portal rankings right now. We'll see if that lasts, but obviously a highly talented player. He's actually the number one overall player in the portal, according to our Rivals analysts. So certainly someone that didn't have a great season, ended up getting beat out at the end by Cade Klubnik, and didn't waste very much time in terms of getting into the portal. I'm sort of intrigued by what he is. Like I wouldn't rule him out as like not gonna work out ever again. But I don't know if that's something that Notre Dame would want to sort of take a chance on. I mean, I think, like I said, I don't know. There's a lot of like obvious, just bring this guy in and plug him in, and he's going to be good to go. And in a way, that's not the end of the world, because Notre Dame does have Tyler Buckner, and it likes Tyler Buckner, and it's not afraid, if it has to go into next season to start Tyler Buckner, that it will do that. Obviously, it wants to create competition, and Notre Dame informed Drew Pine of that, and that was what sort of led to him entering the portal. At least that's how Marcus Freeman portrayed it. We haven't heard from Drew Pine himself. Hudson Card, I think, is intriguing. I mean, a lot of these guys that are in there have sort of regressed. And I don't know that I would put Hudson Card in there. He hasn't done a lot yet. So, I mean, it might just be a lack of not having had the chance to regress as much. So that doesn't necessarily mean he's the best quarterback there, but I think that's the one that's maybe, I I guess the regression thing scares me a bit. And like when you talk about Brennan Armstrong for Virginia, you can say, well, their offense changed. They weren't nearly as good. He had a lot of different players around him. It's like, well, he's gonna have a lot of different players around him at this new school too. Like I do think that whatever Notre Dame can put together for an offense would be a much more stable environment than what Virginia was this year. So I wouldn't be against that, but I don't know that it's like, okay, I would need to know more, and I have not spent enough time like studying Brennan Armstrong's season.
Right.
Did this season go so poorly for him? And how do you sort of get him back on the right track? Since you said you were impressed by the guys going into the portal, who are the guys that jumped out to you, Eric?
Well, one of the ones that I like has been reported to be going to the portal, but I don't see him at least in the Rivals database yet, and that's Devin Leary from North Carolina State.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, the things that I'm looking for that some rule out some of these other guys, I would prefer a quarterback that only has 1 year left. I think if he has only 1 year, then you're not going to chase off maybe Steve Angeli or Tyler Buckner if they don't get the job, because they still would have a chance to win it the following year. I think if you get somebody with multiple years and that player wins the job in the spring, I think you could lose one or both of those guys. So I think that's one thing. And you want somebody that's different than the quarterbacks on your roster from a standpoint of experience. And that's why I like Devin Leary, and that's why I like Brennan Armstrong. And again, I want to kick the tires on Brennan Armstrong because I do want to know why there was such large regression last year. And again, the coaching change, I think, had a lot to do with it. There were still a lot of the same receivers. They didn't have a very good offensive line. They didn't have a very good offense, period. But he brings that true dual threat quarterback to the mix. He's a guy that can run really well. He's a guy that can buy time.
Right.
And I think Notre Dame's offense is better when there's players like that in it. And we've seen that when Notre Dame plays those guys. I mean, obviously Caleb Williams is kind of the ideal model of that, but we've seen it with other quarterbacks. We saw it in the conference championship games, J.J. McCarthy and Max Duggan, that really did damage with their legs and kept their teams alive. And that was something that Drew Pine couldn't do. It is interesting in the Rivals rankings right now, and they've knocked him down a little bit. And originally he was behind only DJ Uyunglele, I messed that up, and Brennan Armstrong. They've since flip-flopped him with Houston Card, but Drew Pine is ranked ahead of everybody else, including Cade McNamara and Graham Mertz, although I'm not sure a lot of people are high on Graham Mertz anymore, but Notre Dame was once upon a time. Nick Evers at Oklahoma is ranked below him. Phil Jakovic way below. And some of the other guys that people were talking about, like Jeff Sims, way down this list in terms of what Rivals feels are the best prospects in the portal.
Yeah, and I mean, I think these are, it's hard to, I mean, it's not any, you would think that it may be easier than projecting high school quarterbacks because you've seen, at least for some of these guys, you've seen what they can do on a college football field. But that isn't always the case. I mean, I think like Jaden Daniels this year at LSU, I think he's, in my opinion, he's better than I thought he would be. I mean, I don't know that when he came into LSU, I don't know that there was a certainty that he would even be the starter. So a lot of things can change. I mean, Hendon Hooker, this wasn't his first year at Tennessee, but I think he exceeded his expectations based on the way his career had gone at Virginia Tech. So it can be, I mean, we're citing these Rivals rankings because we want people to be aware of them, and people are spending time to do these. But I mean, who really knows for sure, like, which of these guys are, like, could Drew Pine go somewhere and have success? Absolutely. Is he the fourth best quarterback in the portal right now? I was a bit surprised when I saw that, but I think he at least had some success this year and showed that he can win football games. And I would imagine there's going to be a market for someone like that in this transfer portal season.
Right. And when you look at last year's crop, and there weren't as many, Rivals has put a lot of resources into the portal, as have some of our competitors. in terms of ranking these guys, but we saw a lot of independent rankings like the Sporting News and Athlon taking this on. And they were talking about guys like Keaton Slovis and JT Daniels.
Right.
And they were kind of a disaster. Even Spencer Rattler, most of the season, was down toward the bottom of the pass efficiency rankings. And then he got hot late in the year. He went from Oklahoma to South Carolina.
Right.
And then the opposite was true. Guys like Michael Penix Jr., went to Washington and it rejuvenated his career. And he was pretty far down in the rankings last year. So it is difficult to project quarterbacks. It's difficult to project fit. And that's why, you don't guarantee the job to somebody. You let them come in and compete. And I think, if Tyler Buckner beats out a quarterback the caliber of Brennan Armstrong or Devin Leary, that would say a lot about Tyler Buckner's development and his potential.
And I do like the fact that Notre Dame's done this before with Jack Cohn. Notre Dame and like even coaches on this coach that like Tommy Rees was here when Jack Cohn came in as a graduate transfer, and he was able to get him ready for what they wanted him to do in the offense. Now didn't necessarily start the season. I mean, there were some ups and downs there with Jack Cohn. I think he was probably playing his best football towards the end of the year. And Notre Dame would hopefully be able to do that with whoever they bring in, sort of right off the bat, and continue that beyond maybe just the first game or two of the season. So I think it's going to be a fascinating time, and I think sort of what you get at there is like a lot of it has to do with how the coaching staff sort of embraces this person, what they put around them, and how they sort of form the offense to maybe accentuate their skills. Maybe that wasn't done at the previous place that they were at.
Okay, our question portal's pretty full. Do you want to take some questions now or finish off?
Yeah, let's go ahead and take some questions now, because
Okay.
they're pretty related to what we've been talking about. So let's not get too far from those things. First one was from Ron Robert. What is your opinion on the supposed offer to the Kent State wide receiver? And as we mentioned before, it's not a supposed offer; it's a real offer. Dante Cephas is the wide receiver from Kent State. What are your thoughts on him, Eric?
Well, I mean, he's the people that I've seen comment on him have had very complimentary things to say about him.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a guy that isn't a rehabbed 5-star that's at Kent State. He's, I think, a 2-star coming out of high school, but he kind of fits what Notre Dame needs in terms of a slot receiver. They don't have somebody that's quite like him on the roster. So I would definitely want to learn more about him, have him come in for a visit and see if it's a fit. I think there's some better receivers than him in the portal, but he's easy fit as far as admissions goes, and he's an easy fit as far as the slot position goes.
Yeah, and I've kept his Twitter page open during the show to make sure that I had the most updated information, because he's been rolling in the offers so far. Today he's reported an offer from Pittsburgh, which is where he's from originally. So Pittsburgh could have an inside track there. West Virginia, Penn State, so some of the more local schools. The Notre Dame, Kansas, and Oklahoma are the schools that he's reported offers from. So he is being recruited pretty hard right now by a number of schools, and we'll see where he ends up leaning, what he's looking for, and if Notre Dame can beat out some of those other schools for him, because they didn't waste a lot of time getting in there and making sure that he had an offer from Notre Dame. All right, let's go to this question from Michael McFadden. How can Drew Pine simply quit the team and decide not to play in arguably the biggest game of the year for Notre Dame? Sorry, but as a 12-year Soren member, I feel he betrayed the school.
Well, I mean, again, technically he could have played. I think that's one of the things about the portal windows and how they're situated, and also the fact that you don't have to wait to go somewhere else, that makes this very knee-jerk, possibly with some players. I know that some have probably been thinking about it for months. And when Marcus Freeman was kind of describing their conversation, it sounded like the tipping point was Notre Dame's decision to bring in a transfer to compete with Drew and the others, and that kind of pushed him out. But so Marcus Freeman could actually try to talk him into staying and saying, hey, you can I'm talking just like Marcus because he does those imaginary. Hey,
Yeah, he does.
um, you can start for us in the bowl game and then still transfer, but it doesn't make any sense for Notre Dame as far as developing who's going to be on your roster next year, because winning this game isn't as important as developing your roster for next year. The way the bowls kind of are structured once you get past the New Year's Six.
Mhm.
So I don't know that he's being betraying the team, but if you thought of anybody that was going to kind of go to the wall for Notre Dame and get his degree and do those things, I kind of thought it would be Drew Pine. So he surprised me, but I'm not necessarily disappointed.
Yeah, he surprised me too, and I think the surprise was probably shared with the coaching staff as well, that he wanted to do this now. I think it wasn't like beyond imagination that he would eventually transfer out, given the way that the quarterback competition goes. But I can understand, like, hey, I was prepared. Like, you guys didn't name me the starter. You gave that job to Tyler Buckner. We lost those 2 games. I came in and did what I could and showed improvement throughout the season, and felt like I put my best foot forward in um, being the quarterback at Notre Dame. And I think he's the thing. It's like, okay, is he being realistic by doing this and knowing that they're probably just going to not name him the starter moving forward? Because I think that was probably the most likely thing anyway. So, like, in that sense, it's like, well, he's sort of reading the situation correctly, I think. But for him to do it in this manner and in this time was a bit surprising. And we'll see. Like, I'm not sure where he's at in terms of trying to graduate. I had always pegged him as someone that would definitely graduate from Notre Dame before he left here. We don't have the details on sort of what that looks like for him, but
I, I
and
think I think we do know that he wouldn't get his degree in December. So if he
right,
were going to
yeah,
get it, he'd at least have to be here in the spring, which he
yeah,
could do. He could do that, but then why jump in the portal now?
yeah. Well, I mean, to make sure you have somewhere lined up. If someone, I mean, if you're going to talk someone into being willing to let you do that, I mean, like, people aren't going to waste a lot of time looking for quarterbacks. I don't think. Like, if like, I don't know that someone would wait, say, yeah, let's not go for a quarterback now. Let's wait for Drew Pine in the spring or whatever. I don't know. I mean, they could do that in terms of getting him on campus, but maybe deciding, like, okay, Drew Pine's the guy we want to bring in. Let's do that. We don't need him here in the spring. He's an experienced player. We'll be okay, and we can still communicate with them or whatever. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's I think the quarterback is that one position where it's like people are going to be looking for a guy or the guy, and so the sooner you can get out in front of that, probably the better your chances are of ending up where you want to be, in a place that really wants you. All right, next question we have is from Nathan Kolda. When we talk going into the portal, what does that actually look like? Paperwork, then released by your school, and no going back, even if you don't get picked up by another school? Question.
Well, there were a lot of players that entered the portal last year that didn't get a scholarship anywhere. But here's how it works. So you file the paperwork and then you're in, and then the school is released of any responsibility for you from that point. Now that doesn't mean you can't go back. Notre
Mhm.
Dame has had one portal U-turn, and that was Houston Griffith a couple of years ago. And but they're not obligated to take you back at that point. So you can decide and say, hey, I'd like to come back. With Notre Dame was recruiting Houston out of the portal. Uh, Marcus Freeman became the defensive coordinator while he was in there, and he really wanted Houston to come back to the team. And Houston thought, well, this is different enough for me to come back, and so he did. But there will be players, and I would say probably more this year, that don't get picked up just because of the sheer volume. But again, we're talking over 1,900 in last year's portal experience. It's really going to be interesting to track this like 10 years from now, this very first cycle, to see if there was more movement this year than any other year, and that people will learn lessons from it, or that this is what we're going to be dealing with every year.
Yeah, I'm of the mind that it will be sort of sort of course correct, and there will be some like bad the story. Although I mean, I don't know, like if someone like drops off of Notre Dame's roster, and doesn't end up at a good school or doesn't end up at a school that they want to, like those players sort of get forgotten, and it's not like who's going to be writing and telling those stories. I think that coverage.
Well, I do a transfer thing every year, and people can see like Micah Jones ended up at Illinois State and didn't play at Illinois State very much.
Right, but usually
people
we're
weren't
talking
saying, "Boy, he should have stayed at Notre Dame,"
right,
because
but
he was
usually
going to be fifth string.
we're talking about a guy that has a Notre Dame degree, and he's probably
Yeah.
going to be okay in life. Whereas we're
Right.
talking about other guys that transfer out of a school as a freshman, aren't interested in even going back to college. Maybe if they don't
Right.
get into a college football career, like what happens to those guys?
Right.
Those are more the stories that I think are the warning signs that people want to sort of warn against, like people that are maybe advising these kids. And I don't know that everyone's listening right now, and so maybe there needs to be more of sort of a case study and case log of guys that this didn't go right for before people learn, maybe are more cautious in terms of entering the portal. But I don't know. I mean, that's just my guess. Maybe that's being too optimistic for like what should happen or what I believe is the right way that things should be handled. But it will be fascinating to sort of track what this looks like. Are we just what's the growth curve? Does it just go like this, or are we going to be going a number of different ways for what the transfer portal numbers look like?
Believe me, that story is already brewing. Way back, I don't know if you remember this, Tyler, but they had way back in the 1980s, which you wouldn't remember from personal experience, but you could remembered it from people talking about it. They had a rule called Proposition 48. Does that sound familiar at all?
Yeah.
Okay, so Tony Rice was a Prop 48 kid, and there was Keith Robinson from the basketball team, and there were several in the Big Ten. So my first national award that I ever got for writing was going back and looking at that first class of Prop 48 kids years later. And it was really interesting because Prop 48s, the reason they were not allowed to be eligible as freshmen was because the prediction was that they weren't going to make it, that they weren't good enough students. And so they had to sit out that first year, couldn't practice or play. And then they could play 3 years. And Tony Rice, so he was the only football Prop 48 Notre Dame ever took. But John Foley was too, the linebacker who got injured. So I went back and did that story, and it was really interesting because those guys, the Prop 48 class, the Big Ten and the Notre Dame kids, actually graduated at a much higher rate than not only the football population at those schools, but the student population at all those schools collectively. And that there were some really neat experiences about, what they had to go through, how it felt like they had the scarlet letter on their chest, and that they ended up being really successful people in life. And it was interesting. Now, I don't know that the transfer portal will be quite that dramatic, but it sounds like a fun story to do down the road.
All right, let's get back to your last two headlines, Eric, and then we can circle back if folks want to submit some more questions we could answer. So what is your fourth headline for this December Monday?
Well, we did this last week, and it's recruiting reset. And believe it or not, some things happened during this week from last week. So Notre Dame sits at 26 commitments for its 2023 class. That the signing period is coming up December 21st through the 23rd, correct? Am I right on that?
Yes.
Okay. In between this week and last week, Notre Dame got a wide receiver commit from Caleb Smith, who's a Texan, and he was originally committed to Texas Tech University. Anyone he left? Well, Brandon Hillman is a multi-position, sometimes it's confusing in our headlines and our stories. We just say he's the number 23 athlete or whatever. And you think, well, everybody's an athlete. Well, Rivals designates an athlete as a player that is being recruited at multiple positions. And that's what Brandon is. He's a wide receiver, running back, safety, Wildcat quarterback kind of guy. And today is the 5th, so he's committing in 2 days.
That's correct.
Which would be Wednesday. If you're watching this later in the week, we're taping obviously on Monday and live on Monday.
Hence the show.
Hence the show. But we're just kind of reminding you that since we get mixed up on our days too. So let's start there with Brandon Hillman, what we think about the chances of him being added to the class.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to look like Notre Dame should or will add him to the class. Notre Dame's liked him a lot. Notre Dame was one of the first schools to really push for Brandon Hillman. There was he had a offer spree that came up in the middle of his senior season and Notre Dame had been sort of poking around there. And then a number of schools, I think maybe were doing the same, and everyone's like, okay, we better get in on this before Brandon Hillman gets away from us. And I think Notre Dame has put itself in a good position to bring him in. And you mentioned Rivals has him categorized as an athlete. That's how Notre Dame has been recruiting him as well. They're not exactly sure what position he'll play, but they like his athletic ability and they can put him in different places. It's been primarily as an offensive athlete. But I mean, if things didn't work out there, you could probably make him into a defensive back. I think he's the type of player that you just sort of get in here and see what happens with him. So we'll see if Notre Dame can push their class to 27. And that would be 2 weeks ahead of the early signing period.
Okay. And so Notre Dame is in a contact period right now, which means they can go out recruiting. They can check in on 2023 commits. They can look at 2024 prospects. The Notre Dame coaches are out on the road. Tyler can get into a little bit more detail with that. But from the 2023 standpoint, Notre Dame is playing defense at this point. They're trying to keep their guys interested in signing in a couple of weeks rather than adding to the class beyond Brandon Hillman, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think for the most part, they're making sure that everything's good with their commitments. Today, Marcus Freeman and Dylan McCullough were out in Washington to visit with Jaden Lamar, a running back commit, and Notre Dame has 3 running back commits. So need to make sure all those guys are still good with Notre Dame. And Oregon has been making a late run at Jaden Lamar. So for Notre Dame to get out there right away in this contact period, I don't think is a coincidence. It's probably good timing to see Jaden Lamar actually just won a state title this past weekend. So some good feelings there, I'm sure, for the running back commit, and just to make sure that he's still on board and wants to come to Notre Dame, and Notre Dame can sort of reinforce its vision for him and the other running backs in the offense in the future. Beyond that, obviously Peyton Bowen is someone that we know they're playing defense on. Oklahoma being the most notable poaching a team that's trying to poach him from Notre Dame. Peyton Bowen, who just today was given a 5-star rating from Rivals, and he's now the number 10 overall prospect in the country. So Notre Dame has thought really highly of him from the start. And I know that at one point when Rivals lowered Peyton Bowen's ranking, I had heard from people over at Notre Dame. They're like, really, what are you guys doing over there? And so I think they're probably pretty pleased with where he's now landed in the Rivals rankings. And we'll see if Notre Dame can get him. It would be, if they lost Peyton Bowen after having lost Keon Keeley, who is still a 5-star recruit, that would be pretty painful. And then you look at Dante Moore, who they thought they were going to get. That would be 3 5-star recruits that Notre Dame at one point thought it would be signing in its class, and then wouldn't end up at Notre Dame. So Peyton Bowen's sort of the last man standing there as the 5-star. There's certainly some of Notre Dame's higher ranked commits could end up as 5-stars in the final rankings update after some of the All-Star games in January. But beyond that, I think Notre Dame is going to be sniffing around on some other guys. Today, we reported in our trail track story that we will be doing on days when Notre Dame's coaching staff is out on the recruiting trail. Solomon Davis, actually, we reported it today, but yesterday is when Solomon Davis received a visit from Notre Dame cornerbacks coach Mike Mickens. He went out to California to see him. He's listed as a wide receiver in our Rivals database, and I believe a 3-star recruit. But Notre Dame has evaluated him and likes him as a potential cornerback, which, given the reason Mike Mickens is the one visiting him, he's been committed to Arizona. So we'll see if there's some movement there. If Notre Dame pushes for him, he told me that both Oregon and Notre Dame are sort of the only two schools beyond Arizona that are continuing to sort of be in touch with him. So that's a name to sort of watch moving forward, and we'll have plenty of coverage of where Notre Dame's coaches are throughout the week on the Insider Lounge message board and on InsideNDSports.com.
So why do you think there's this sudden interest in him? Is this to replace Bellamy, or is this just in case for somebody else?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably has something to do with Bellamy and maybe the potential of losing other cornerbacks to the transfer portal. I think, like we mentioned earlier, we thought that is a possibility that some of those maybe sophomores could end up in the transfer portal. So I think it's an understanding of where they believe the roster is going, and certainly Notre Dame has a better idea of that than we do. This isn't someone that, from my understanding, that's jumped up out of nowhere. This is someone that Notre Dame had on its radar for a while, but hadn't necessarily made any public overtures in his direction, which tends to be the case with someone that's committed somewhere else. They usually sort of try to keep that under wraps till it gets towards the end when they're getting real serious about pushing for that player. So I think it has more to do with that. Like Micah Bell received a Georgia offer this week, which is where his brother plays. And I was told that Notre Dame is good with Micah Bell. Like they're not concerned about that, which I think would be awful if Notre Dame lost a second cornerback in the class to Georgia, because Justin Rhett, a former Notre Dame commit, ended up in Georgia's class as well. So that's sort of the latest with recruiting. I'm sure we'll see if there's anything that pops up. What do you got, Eric?
Well, the one thing we want to mention is that Rivals is going to have a new 250
correct
this week. So depending on what day you're watching this, it may already be out. It's not out as of tonight, as of Monday. What day is that supposed to come out, Tyler?
Which day? I'm sorry, say it again.
Yeah, which day is the top 250?
It's Tuesday. Tuesday.
Okay, Tuesday. Okay, like Taco Tuesdays, top 250 Tuesdays.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, and then the other thing in the segment I want to ask you is, if somebody said you would get a brand new car if you got this question right, do you think Bowen is going to end up at Notre Dame? And you can't say Drake Bowen; it has to be.
Well, I just did a story, a prediction, class prediction, earlier this. Well, I guess that was last week. The days are blurring together. Last week, to start the month of December, like, hey, this is my final class prediction, and I included Peyton Bowen in there. Now that was the most painful one for me. Like, I have been tempted to take him out of my class prediction, even though he still is committed to Notre Dame for a couple months now. But Notre Dame seems confident that it can hold on to him, so I'm going to stick with that. It would be the least surprising thing in the world if he doesn't stick with Notre Dame. But if I'm going to gamble, that's the way I would gamble. But I don't feel great about it, and certainly I could use a new car, so that would be a good thing for me to be able to win in this situation. But yeah, I mean, there's just been so much interest in Oklahoma, and it never seems to cease. And so can Notre Dame sort of pull him away from everything that's pulling him to Oklahoma? And we'll have to see how that goes.
Well, I'll tell you, the one thing is, I don't watch a lot of the film before these guys get here. I have with Peyton Bowen. Man, he's pretty good.
It's hard to avoid it. He does something crazy like every week.
Yeah.
And he's still playing. There's
just Kyle keeps filling our timelines with it.
he's still playing. He could still be playing. I think they're going to a semifinal, so he could still be playing 2 more high school games before the All-American game. So he's been busy on the field in addition to the recruiting process.
Okay, do we want to go to the headline portal or the question portal at this point?
Let's go to the question portal real quick. We got a couple here. First one's from Roger Lancey again. With the expanded playoff system in 2024, will that be the end of the bowl system?
It may be the end of the bowl system as we know it. They're going to try to. They've talked about incorporating the bowls into at least the later rounds. I think they're going to go with home games in the early rounds, but there's people that have even thought about, gosh, why wouldn't you have home games in the quarterfinals instead of incorporating the bowl games in the quarterfinal round? Because it's going to be difficult for people to afford to travel. Let's say you're, the 12 seed or whatever, you have to play in that first round, then you have to play in the quarterfinals. If you're a Cinderella team, then the semifinals and the finals, that's a lot of travel. Could the average fan be able to afford 4 trips in a very short period of time?
wasn't part of this agreement to move it up, guaranteeing that the Bulls would be involved? Like it wasn't that sort of aligning that
It
those Bulls?
is. They are aligning with at least in the semifinals and I want to say the quarterfinals, they would have 6 bowls. The 6 that are in the New Year 6
Right.
would still be in existence. I think there's a little wiggle room there, but they even thought about, okay, well, let's make that 5 through 12. Those are going to be home games. So for Notre Dame, every time they make the playoffs, since they can't be 1 through 4 as a conference champion, if they're 5 through 8, or even if they're 1 through 8, they would have a home game. So if you liked seeing all that snow in the Boston College game a few weeks ago, get ready for more of that. If Notre Dame makes the playoff with a home game, especially if it's a team from the South, having to come up here and play in that. Uh, but as far as like the Gator Bowl and the Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl and some of those, the Jimmy Kimmel Los Angeles Bowl, I don't know that there's a future for them because we have to kind of see what the opt-outs look like this year. And with the transfer portal calendar moved up like this, that could certainly affect it. I don't know that we got a great read on the opt-outs the last couple years because 2020 was in the thick of no vaccine COVID, and 2021 was there were vaccines, but there was a lot of COVID going on in 2021 that affected teams. There's not that this year. So if we see a record amount of opt-outs, we may be seeing the end of the bowl system as we know it. It might shrink.
Yeah, I would like if something is going to kill the Bulls, I think it could be that rather than the expanded playoff system in my mind. I mean, so maybe the elevated nature of some of these bowls could change given the expanded playoff system. But I do think I don't know. I mean, I'm a football nut, so like I'll watch anyone play anyone during December. Like I don't care. Like put it on my TV at 2 p.m. Now we have jobs that make it allow us to watch those games, so that maybe we're in the
And sometimes
minority there.
require us to.
Yeah. I think the ratings are usually still pretty good, and as long as the TV money's there, there's going to be an incentive to make those things happen. So we'll see. I do think it'll probably change and will look different, but I think for years people have been wondering like when will bowls start dying, and we haven't really seen a wave of bowls ceasing to exist. They seem to for the most part have been holding strong here and continuing to go on
As
despite
long as
the
there's TV
complications.
money, I think that helps. It's just if the TV money goes away, if there's not enough, I mean, if there's not enough interest, I mean, they've been talking about too many bowls since the 80s, and they've just added them.
Yeah. All right. A comment more than a question. HJ Greg, I still think ND is better than Purdue, at least not 2 rungs down. What are your thoughts? Do you think Notre Dame is still better than Purdue?
Well, it didn't have anything to do with Notre Dame getting selected. It had to do with where LSU was in the pecking order. These bowls, the Citrus Bowl,
Right.
has affiliation with the Big Ten and the SEC. And so, in terms of where it's slotting its teams, the SEC is going to slot the Gator Bowl a couple lower. So it goes in that sequence Citrus, then ReliaQuest Bowl, which is in Tampa, and that's Illinois versus Mississippi State, and then South Carolina, Notre Dame in the Gator Bowl. Now, I think that there may have been some politicking for South Carolina to be paired with Notre Dame and Mississippi State going to play Illinois in the ReliaQuest Bowl because I think the Gator Bowl is a way better game than the ReliaQuest Bowl is. So it just happens to be that Purdue was a division champion. So the Big Ten does not have a lot of parity there. And so they had to take someone once you get past the top teams, Ohio State and Michigan, which are both in the playoff, and then Penn State that's going to the Rose Bowl. You have to start picking somebody else. So no,
Yeah,
I
it
don't think
gets pretty thin there quickly.
yeah, I think Purdue would lose to Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame's the better overall team, and I think Aiden O'Connell and Charlie Jones are amazing. I mean, that is an incredible boy. Was that a smart? And I know Notre Dame wanted him, but boy, is that a smart portal pairing from last year? Because Charlie was playing at Iowa and was basically a special team star as a punt returner, and gets a chance to be a star receiver at Purdue. And you're wondering who is the offensive coordinator at Iowa that came up with that. That with Cade McNamara going to Iowa. Who goes to Iowa to play quarterback?
Yeah, that was something. And like, yeah, if I'm like a player personnel or someone in a coach looking in the transfer portal, I'm looking at Iowa's roster and say, hey, who's on that offense that wasn't being utilized well, because
Right.
clearly they weren't utilizing Charlie Jones and maximizing his abilities. And maybe there's someone else on that roster from this past season that can fall into that category as well. All right, one last question from Ron Robert. Again, thank you, Ron, for all the questions. Any sense if Marcus is going to see Peyton Bowen?
I'm going to defer that to you. I know that Chris O'Leary, the safeties coach, went down there, and I think there's not a limit on assistants that can see him. Marcus can see him once. I would guess that that's going to happen, but you followed a lot more closely, Tyler.
Yeah, it will and should happen unless for some reason Peyton Bowen says, no, don't come here. I'm going to Oklahoma. That is something that Notre Dame will want to do. And I think they're just trying to figure out what's the best timing to do that. As someone who's sort of been indecisive while staying committed to Notre Dame, I think you want to make that as late as possible before the signing period. I think someone on our message board, the Insider Lounge, joked that I think December 17th is the last day of the contact period. And someone was like, so Marcus Freeman's going to be in Peyton Bowen's house till 11:59 on December 17th, right? Just to make sure everything goes in line. So I think Notre Dame's waiting for the right moment because Marcus Freeman only does get one visit for every recruit there. So I haven't nailed down when exactly that will occur. But I would be shocked if it doesn't happen at some point in the next.
If I were Marcus, I would try to work my way to Dom Merriweather's house, Tobias's dad, to have some of the burn ends, because he didn't get those last year. Brian Kelly ate those.
Yeah, I don't know how far Lake Stevens is from Dom Merriweather, but maybe they made that part of the trip today.
Okay. So do we want to go to the last headline?
Yeah, let's get our last headline in here and wrap it up.
Okay, this isn't a really clever headline, but the concept is, what did we learn or what didn't we learn from the conference championship games this weekend? I'll tell you, I got to see a lot of teams that I hadn't seen all year. Right. I hadn't seen TCU at all, and Max Dugan won me over. I was really impressed with TCU's quarterback, and I was impressed with Kansas State too. They were playing with a backup quarterback, and those two teams showed me something. I mean, that was a really exciting game. I think that Clemson, North Carolina game was interesting because Notre Dame had beaten both of those teams. The Big Ten championship, Purdue hung in there for a while, and Charlie Jones was amazing. He did not make my Heisman Trophy list, but I would have voted for him for the Biletnikoff if he got to the end there. The game, though, that a lot of people were talking about was the Pac-12 championship, because Utah thumped USC. The last time they played them, it was a 1-point game. This time, Utah just kind of beat them up. Now, Caleb Williams, the quarterback, who probably will win the Heisman, suffered a hamstring pull and wasn't the Caleb Williams we're used to seeing. I think there was a domino effect into the defense and things like that. But I'm curious, Tyler, what was your impression? Did you watch that whole game?
Yes, I did. I definitely wanted to see what USC looked like, and obviously, as a Heisman voter, wanted to watch Caleb Williams again to see where I want to potentially put him on my ballot. And yeah, I mean, there was discussion like, man, Notre Dame could have beat USC, which I agree, but Caleb Williams just wasn't the same player, and it was pretty obvious that he was being limited. And if you watch the Notre Dame game, Notre Dame's issues were based on what he was able to do with his feet and sort of creating, whether he was running the football or just scrambling to create better throwing opportunities for himself and avoiding the pass rush. He gave Notre Dame fits. I mean, it was Notre Dame's worst tackling effort of the season. That had a lot to do with Caleb Williams, and Notre Dame wasn't necessarily sharp with some of the other players on USC's roster it was trying to defend. But yeah, to see Utah sort of do that to them, I mean, that was what Notre Dame wanted to do. That was the best execution of it. But Utah was certainly aided in this instance by Caleb Williams' inability to sort of scramble and use his legs to create opportunities for that. And the Big 12 game, to me, like, I think some people are like, the Big 12 is not very good. So how good is TCU? I thought I was impressed with both teams. I didn't watch that game and say, like, these teams don't belong. Like, for TCU, for instance, I do think TCU belongs in the playoff. I came from that game thinking that it probably was right to leave them at 3 ahead of Ohio State. And we'll see how TCU fares against Michigan, how Ohio State fares against Georgia. I like the playoff. I think Georgia's sort of far and away the best team. But I don't know what sort of playoff you're going to put together that would have changed my opinion of that. I think the 4 deserving teams got into the playoff, and we'll see how that plays out.
So did you watch the whole Georgia game? I wanted to see Brian Kelly coach, so I made sure. Yeah, I had the day off. So what did I do? I watched football pretty much most of the day and did a few household chores.
I turned it off once it got out of hand. I didn't really tune in very often. If I saw something, people tweeting, like, I think the clip of Jalen Carter holding someone up, like I saw that,
yeah.
Instead of the holding up the
Jane
quarterback.
Daniels, he carried him like a doll.
Yeah. So I saw some of the other highlights after that, but I wasn't locked in after it became pretty clear that LSU wasn't going to stand a chance.
LSU's number 2 quarterback played pretty well.
Yep.
He was zinging it down the field. Mike Denbrock had some good plays for him. Actually, Mike Denbrock did a pretty good job as LSU's offensive coordinator. But boy, Brian Polian has some splaining to do as the special teams guy.
Yeah, from start to finish of that season for LSU, the special teams have been an issue. That's a bit unfortunate for Brian Polian and Brian Kelly down there in Baton Rouge. All right. Well, I think that wraps it up. We appreciate everyone for tuning in or watching live, or tuning in to watch this on replay,
or pretending to.
Yeah, just turn it on and put it on somewhere and just leave your phone in another room with it playing and just let us get the minutes and views from you. Let us know in the comments. I think we haven't decided what our schedule is with this moving forward. If there's interest in us continuing to do this, I think we are willing to entertain that. So let us know in the comments if you want us to do another live show next Monday. Also in the comments, give us your transfer portal wish list for Notre Dame. Who do you want Notre Dame to really push for here in the next couple weeks? And we'll have plenty of coverage of transfer portal activity, recruiting development, and Gator Bowl preparation. So make sure you follow us on over to InsideNDSports.com for all your Notre Dame football coverage needs.